But will it bring an end to prostitution or simply deny the women a valid choice and put them at further risk? That's what we'll be debating with experts, our studio audience and women who have worked in the sex industry.
Eamon Gilmore announces the reopening of the Vatican Embassy just 2.5 years after closing it on cost grounds. So why has this decision been taken now? Is this a U-turn, a wise move to foster relations with the Holy See, or part of the political horse trading of coalition government?
And we'll also have the latest on Syria. Hello there and welcome. Well, first up tonight, a campaign to criminalise the men who buy sex in an attempt to end prostitution is gaining momentum and political support. So is it a good idea and would it actually work? Well, I'm first going to speak to two women in my audience who will know a lot about this. Mia DeFuicha, thank you so much for coming. You describe yourself, Mia, as a survivor of prostitution. Yes. What do you mean by that?
Because I spent 6 years, nearly 6 years on the Burlington Road being purchased, because that is what prostitution is, the purchase of another human being for sex. And everything about it, my whole experience is quite disturbing. I'm a survivor of a gang rape. The girl that was with me did not survive. Her drug use spiraled out of control and she died of an overdose 2 months later. I've numerous other assaults. I witnessed nothing but severe violations of human rights and humiliation. I stood alongside a trafficked woman. You know, it's quite cruel and disturbing what's out there.
And what about the feeling, Mia, about this idea of criminalising the people who pay for sex, which often in this case is men, that would in some way going to help prostitutes?
Well, the only reason the sex industry exists is because of the men who buy human beings for sex. So the only way to stop the trade is to cut off what makes it exist in the first place, and that is them. I personally believe that no one has the right to buy another human being to do with their body what they wish, and that is what it is. You know, when you approached me, you know, and asked for a sexual act, I didn't take it out of my pocket and hand it to you. No, you had to buy me. You know, you have to buy the person before you can gain access to their body, and that's what we need to grasp.
OK, and we're going to come back and I'll be talking to you again, Mia, in a little while. I'm just getting a flavour at the very top. Right opposite you is Lyness Falls. Again, you have worked in the same industry as Mia, but you have a very different view, don't you, Lyness?
Yeah, so I've actually worked on and off the industry and still work on and off. I don't feel that this, if we introduce the Swedish law, that it would actually change, because those who are most vulnerable will continue to work in the industry. So, for example, buyers, those who may not be willing to take the risk and are afraid of anything happening to them in regards to that, they will actually they will leave and not continue to buy it. But those who are riskier will then end up there will be a smaller supply, and it will end up creating a buyer's market. So those will be the people who will then ask for such things. They'll take clients who are drunk, who are violent, and also that they'll end up asking for riskier acts such as sex without condoms as well.
What about, though, the feeling, Lyness, that it's never really a choice for someone who works in your industry, that ultimately you always are subjugated or the victim to the person who's buying the sex?
No, because, for example, I can choose when, for example, if I don't want to do a certain act, I can say I don't want to do that act. And there is a certain economic coercion to anything. So, for example, someone even working and cleaning bathrooms or working a dead-end job, it is also an economic coercion as well.
Well, look, I think it's really great that both of you were courageous enough to speak here tonight. I'm going to come back to you, but just in the meantime, and we will be discussing it in a moment, but first, Robert Short lays out the arguments on both sides of the debate.
Prostitution, The dictionary definition is the practice or occupation of engaging in sexual activity with someone for payment. But it's much more than that. Prostitution has become the focus of a debate which has veered from civil liberties to people trafficking and produced divergent views on human rights.
Any party, whether they're selling or buying sexual services, may be prosecuted for solicitation or loitering in a public place for the purpose of prostitution. We would move away from that model and we would decriminalise those who are selling sexual services. In other words, those, usually women, engaged in prostitution. And instead we would simply criminalise the men, the purchasers of sexual services.
Prostitution is rather like a chameleon. In the face of repressive policy, it doesn't retreat, it simply changes form and adapts to the context in which it finds itself.
The Oireachtas Joint Committee on Justice, Defence and Equality heard 800 submissions on proposed changes to our prostitution laws. It produced a report some months ago which recommended the introduction of laws that would decriminalise the seller of sexual services and criminalise the purchasers. It's called the Swedish model, after similar legislation was passed there in 1999.
We certainly spoke with Swedish police officers and law enforcement people in social protection and so on about, whether it had driven prostitution underground, which is one of the critiques we heard. What we heard from them was prostitution has always been underground. It's underground in every society, but it can never be so underground that it's completely hidden.
But not everyone believes the evidence exists to suggest the Swedish model has been a success.
If we want to eliminate prostitution, the Swedish model is not the way to go. It doesn't eliminate prostitution, it merely pushes it elsewhere. It pushes it underground, it pushes it away from support services and other interventions which are vital for many sex workers to allow them to have some sort of mechanism of control over their own safety.
The other motivation behind support for this legislation is that it more effectively targets people trafficking.
It is going to be very difficult to identify victims of sexual exploitation, of enslavement, of abuse, and also victims of sex trafficking, when all prostitution is regarded as sexual exploitation. We neglect then to make qualitative distinctions, and that throws up a range of problems and issues.
Because it's very hard to prove trafficking, and it's very hard to move beyond what is currently seen as a sort of a non-trafficked person in prostitution and a person who's been trafficked in. Swedish law eliminates that sort of difficulty by simply focusing on criminalising the client.
The Minister for Justice has requested advice from both the Attorney-General and the Minister for Health on the report produced by the Joint Committee. The consideration of any legislation will not be done until those reports are complete.
Robert Short reporting there. Now joined by Denise Charlton from the Immigrant Council of Ireland, Sarah Benson, who's the CEO of Rahama, which is an organisation that really provides frontline services for women affected by prostitution, by Dr Teresa Whittaker to my left here, social scientist, and Niki Adams, who's the spokeswoman for International Prostitutes Collective. And you yourself, I know, worked in the industry like Mia and Ines. Starting with you Denise, your Turn Off the Red Light campaign. You say you hope it will bring an end to prostitution, but that is naive to think it will end prostitution, isn't it?
Well, the 68 organisations that form the campaign wouldn't agree with that. We are doctors, nurses, businessmen, businesswomen, about 1.6 million of the population, and we're also supported by 3 out of the 4 political parties. 23 county councils have voted in favour of a change, and the reason for that is that it's evidence-based. We're looking at the approach that tackles the demand that Mia talked about earlier. That says, you know what, it's not okay to buy women and girls. We know that girls and women are interchangeable in the market. We know that it's organised crime that's profiting from it. And we also know that in other countries and jurisdictions that actually the introduction of such an approach has made a massive difference. It has half-street prostitution. It has deterred human trafficking. One example is, if you look at Sweden, they have about 600 women on the streets. If you look at Barcelona, they have about 20,000. Very different approaches. We also know from the evidence that we did and we gathered that the approaches were a different approach to prostitution and trafficking, such as Germany and Holland. They're actually saying now it's failed, that the outcomes for women are very negative. and that actually what we really need to do is rethink it. The red light district in Amsterdam is being rethought.
Okay.
And yet the success in Sweden is phenomenal.
Teresa Whitaker, you have done research in this area. I think you spoke yourself to 31 workers, didn't you? And you support the Blue Light campaign. You don't agree with Denise, do you?
No, I'm afraid not, because first of all, in Sweden, they had no basis first. They had no statistics of the numbers of people engaged in prostitution. So then they produced research that says the number has decreased, but they don't know what the original number was. And the fact is, in Sweden, it has simply gone underground. It hasn't disappeared, it has become invisible. And that is really dangerous, sadly, for the women who are working there. And what this law will do is it'll make it so much more harmful for the women. It's not going to get rid of prostitution. Prostitution has been around since even prior to biblical times in ancient Rome and Greece. It's mentioned in the Bible. It has existed in societies. So we need to help and support the women.
But we have other legislation to protect people, don't we? Like lots of other different laws that protect women like Mia.
We have the Anti-Human Trafficking Act, which is a very strong piece of legislation. Yes, we have lots of legislation. So we don't actually need another piece of legislation.
But should we have, though, laws that help women who have to make those choices because out of poverty, whatever, they're forced into making those choices? Surely they don't need that. They don't want to have to make those choices. And the legislation could help them to stop making those choices.
How could it stop them? Because by criminalising the buyer, you are, in effect, criminalising the seller, because that report that was brought out by that committee said, well, we should take away their mobile phones, we should evict them from their premises, we should, the men who buy sex should be treated like paedophiles. They conflate paedophilia with those who access escort sites. So it's going to be much more harmful for society.
Sarah, Rahama's stance on that?
Rahama work with over 250 women every year, and in 2012 alone we worked with 32 different nationalities. And I think the critical point is that demand drives the sex trade, and the sex trade in Ireland is not populated by vast numbers of women who are operating on an independent basis. The vast majority of prostitution in this country is associated with organised crime. We have very direct evidence to show that there is an attractive, lucrative market here. It is entirely driven by a minority of men, I think it's important to note, who are simply using their disposable income in order to access women who have at best entered in as a survival tactic, and at worst are trafficked.
That kind of crime because it's illegal, because it's forced underground, and in some way it wasn't like that. It wouldn't attract that crime.
In any jurisdiction, prostitution will be associated with organised crime. If you look at jurisdictions such as the Netherlands, as Germany, and particularly the Netherlands have done a very comprehensive review of their own situation, they have a regulated sector. And at the same time, they have a completely unquantified illegal sector. It doesn't cover sex clubs, it doesn't cover internet advertising, escorting, and what they have said is that they can't even police the regulated trade. So what actually happens when you start to decriminalise or regulate the sex trade, you actually increase the numbers, and now there's 2 reports that are with the Irish Labour Organisation that show when you increase the numbers in the sex trade, you increase the numbers of victims of trafficking.
Niki Adams, we're all talking around, and you're someone who knows the subject, because like Mia and Liness, you've been there. What do you think?
Well, I've also been working with the International Prostitutes Collective for over 20 years and have worked with hundreds and hundreds of women. And one thing we do know is that 70% of sex workers are mothers, mostly single mothers, and we feel that if prostitution policy were framed by that fact, we would come up with a very different conclusion. And it's not true that the sex industry is fueled by demand. What's true is that the sex industry, women going into prostitution, because it's an economic choice, it's a choice that you make considering your other economic choices at the time, and you look and see at that particular moment, it may not be a fantastic job, but it's the best choice often of a set of bad choices. And at this moment in time in Ireland, when 1 in 5 children are going to school hungry, the idea that the best solution to that crisis, where women are going into prostitution to feed their families, is to criminalise clients and make it harder.
Surely the solution isn't for a woman to think she has to go and sell her body and sell sex to let herself and her children survive. I mean, surely our society shouldn't make a woman think that that
it's really
is
not
her only
ideal.
option.
But why is it not that the poverty is not being dealt with? Why is that not the solution? Why is actually increasing the criminalisation of prostitution suddenly
become... But they're not mutually exclusive. It doesn't mean because a woman is poor, she has to make that choice.
No, and in fact, a lot of women would say, well, look, actually, I would never, ever go into prostitution, but I defend your right to do that if that's what you think is the best option for you at that particular moment in time. And there is another option as well. It doesn't have to be just Sweden or the situation that we face here and in the UK or the Germany and legalisation model. New Zealand decriminalised prostitution back in 2003. I have been there and I have seen how it's actually worked in practice. And the big difference with New Zealand is that it removed prostitution from the criminal law. They found that there was no increase in prostitution, that attacks were cleared up much more easily because women did feel more able to come forward and report violence, and a different relationship was built with the police.
Just a couple of points. One is the trafficking legislation here is not fit for purpose, and there have been no prosecutions and very little protection. Most of the women that we're working with are victims of trafficking.
I'm focusing, though, if you would, for the moment, on Niki's point about, poverty.
So as an organisation that's working with migrants and their human rights, what we would really hate to see is that the only option for them as an alternative to poverty, I couldn't agree more with you, we must tackle poverty. We absolutely must. But we would really like to see other alternates to poverty rather than the fact that you are vulnerable to trafficking and pimps, because really all poverty does, and war and abuse in family, and all those factors that make women vulnerable to trafficking and prostitution.
Let me come back on that for a moment, because obviously, poverty is a bad thing. Everybody knows that. But you're not going to eradicate or eliminate poverty. What about Niki's...
But we haven't eradicated murder.
Point,
say, for example, we haven't eradicated
murder. What about Niki's point
murder?
that it's a choice? It's a valid choice for a woman that if she wants to be a prostitute, she should be able to be a prostitute.
Can I come
in?
Sorry. Okay. I suppose the critical thing is that prostitution should never be a solution to women's poverty and girls' poverty.
But it is a solution for us, though. Sometimes it is a solution for us, and if that's the option, I'm not disputing that there's a lot of rape and murder that happens against sex workers, but domestic workers face a similar level of rape and violence.
There is nothing as dangerous as prostitution in relation
to the... It's completely untrue that the majority of sex workers are victims of trafficking. It may be that many women are immigrant. But that is not the same thing. The women themselves always say, just because we're foreign, we're not forced. That's what they say about themselves. And you do have to distinguish between prostitution and trafficking.
I would refute that.
Prostitution is essentially consenting
we work
sex.
With women in
and that's
this
what you're
context.
Criminalising.
Prostitution and sex trafficking are inextricably linked. We
no
have
more than with
clear
tomato
evidence.
growing.
We are working with women who are... in one...
we have been through this story before many times.
We've worked with thousands of women. You have situations where the trafficker and the pimp is the same person. They're acquiring women in order to meet a demand.
Don't talk of each other too much.
Sorry.
Let's hear a vision, then I'll bring you back
But we had women politicians going around saying that 80% of sex workers were trafficked. As soon as they did a proper analysis of those figures, they found it was a complete fabrication. We've been there before.
Okay, I'm not making any comment on... I have not said that all victims of trafficking are all women in prostitution are victims of trafficking. We work with women who are actively in prostitution. We work with women who fit the very narrow criteria for victims of trafficking. What I will say is that the fundamental danger and harm of prostitution cannot be regulated away. It cannot be, managed away. You cannot have prostitution.
I don't understand
prostitution is predicated on the vulnerability of women and girls, because you will never have enough women who are in a position of autonomous choice to meet the demand. If you regulate for demand, you create a normative situation whereby sex purchase is regarded as normal, the numbers go up, the demand goes up, and that is patently evident in jurisdictions where that's happened. We want to minimise the harm of prostitution.
Harmful about prostitution. Fundamentally prostitution is consenting sex.
We provide
people have all kinds of
support services for those who are in the trade.
Who's currently part of this industry. Lynette, listening to that view and the question of choice, do you think it's possible, though, to do what people do in this industry as a woman and not be traumatised by it? I mean, is it a real choice, do you think, Vanessa?
Yeah, I think it's a real choice. So I actually have worked in Germany, so I would strongly dispute what you're saying. Also because I'm in a group with a group of sex workers. We're a group who meet up regularly every couple of months about what's going on in the street and how it's affecting us. And they are people who've made careers or people who are students who are trying to make money that way. And they're fine. And there's women who make active careers and then they're traumatised.
Why have you chosen to do it as a part career?
It's not a career. Like, I'm doing it at the moment just to fund myself in order to pay for me to go through college at the moment. But I enjoy it. I enjoy it than working than waitressing.
Does Mia think?
Go on.
I'm just wondering what Mia thinks.
Well, prostitution and sex trafficking are intrinsically linked. You know, women are trafficked into prostitution. You know, I stood alongside a trafficked woman. You know, we get trapped in the brothels together, and if and when we survive, we stand together. You know, and what connects us is that we are bought, used, raped, humiliated, and attacked by the same men. The same man bought me one night, bought my trafficked friend the next. That's the connection, and that can't be broken. You know, that can never be separated by anyone at any time in any country. That's what connects us. The men that buy us. That's the reason they're here.
To divide women, because this is not what this programme is about. But Liness, your experience seems to be very different to that of Mia. Why is that? I mean, it's just fascinating, the pair of you. You've done the same thing and you think completely differently to Mia. Why do you think that is in your case, Liness?
I think there's...
And Niki, of course.
Might have been different policies involved. I don't know Mia's story exactly as well. Like, all I hear now is what happened to her, and that there wasn't the places there that are available to go to and turn to. Like, I've worked in Germany, and in Germany there are places that you can turn to, and there's people there as well who are sex workers who you can talk to and discuss about what is going on. And I think there's a lot more available services. And
have you been lucky? I let you in. Have you never had any, scary experiences or unpleasant experiences, Liness?
No.
I don't think you can conflate the two things. What one woman is describing is rape and abuse and false imprisonment and assault and a whole kind of other criminal offences. And what the other woman is describing is consenting sex. And that's really what prostitution comes down to. It may be that people have a moral difficulty with casual sex. Prostitution is a form of, people have all kinds of sex, and prostitution is one kind of sex where payment is involved.
So let's Denise come back and let you back in.
Gay sex was criminalised for many years, and then at a certain point...
Prostitution is not a sexuality. It is not a sexual orientation.
I mean, I don't think you can tell other women what it is.
LGBT rights
if I say that I know the difference between rape and consenting sex...
Don't talk over each other.
If I say I know the difference between rape and consenting sex, you can't tell me that my experience is not that. You can't say to other women, you don't know your own mind, you are being traumatised without even knowing it.
I think there is a huge difference between consenting sex between adults and prostituted sex, and certainly the experience of the Immigrant Council and the women that we're working with and the stories they tell us, it is about abuse, exploitation and that link between trafficking and prostitution. The other comment to make is just in terms of the figures. We now know from the International Labour Organization that anywhere there is a sex trade, between 10 and 25% are victims of trafficking, and that children and girls are in that. That are the facts.
I'm sorry, that's not true in the UK. It's completely been disproved.
And they would support the figures of the research here in Ireland. We know that girls and women are interchangeable. We know that punters buy women, young flesh often, and they don't know the difference. We did a piece of research that asked men their attitudes in relation to buying of sex, and 1 in 4 thought that they had met a woman who was trafficked or exploited.
I want to bring in a couple of men. Dr. Derek Friedman, where are you in my audience? Derek Friedman, what's your own position on this, Derek?
Well, I think, what I've heard, this evening has been a number of cliches and rather naive statements. We hear about the Swedish model, and it's driven people off the street. When I was looking for this, I just Googled escort in Stockholm. I got 2 million hits. So it certainly hasn't worked. and it certainly is unlikely to work. And I think the whole concept of criminalisation of human behaviour is always subject to failure and getting people into difficulty.
Victims, though. I mean,
there are victims, but I think actually what we should be focusing on is actually protecting people and ensuring that they have proper health and safety and that they are protected and not exploited. I could not agree more with you about the stories, what you hear of people who are working on the street. But again, street working is completely different from the majority of prostitution activity that is seen in Ireland and abroad. Also, I mean, you talk about the Swedish model and they've got people off the street. We've had the same effect with rain here. So, you know, you cannot just draw these wide generalisations. It is extremely important. I think we should focus on protecting people, that prostitutes should not be abused, that the clients should not be abused, and just think of the concept of abuse.
How do you do? Sorry, Derek, that all sounds well and good.
No, hold on.
No. If you're a prostitute in the streets of Dublin, picked up by a guy who mistreats you,
but there aren't many on. There aren't walk down. You know, walk through Fitzwilliam Square. There aren't many on the streets anymore. It's all on the mobile phone.
But they're very vulnerable,
the
those women.
Yeah, but there's very few in the street today.
Indoors,
but let's.
The women that we work with are in the majority indoors, though.
Sorry?
The women that we're both working with in the majority
you're seeing the street workers, but the majority of people...
majority are indoors.
Yeah.
OK, let me bring back in Alan O'Neill and then I'll come back to Alan. Alan O'Neill, you're with the Men's Development Network and you're part of the Turn Off the Red Light campaign, aren't you, Alan?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd just like to say about what Niki was saying. She started with an assumption that wasn't correct. She said that it wasn't about the demand, it wasn't demand-driven. Women wouldn't have a choice to go into prostitution if men weren't looking to buy women for sex. That's the absolute bottom line. And men have to stop doing that. And this law is about stopping men doing that. And we have, as you said earlier, we have lots of laws that criminalise activities because they victimise other people. And this is one of them that needs to happen. And men have to be criminalised for this in order to get them to stop. And it's what works. It won't wipe it off the street or out. It won't end prostitution immediately. And I'd like to say about what Derek said. The Swedish police who work in this area have been to Ireland a number of times, and they've clearly said that it's working. And the research shows that it's working.
OK, David Walsh, where are you in the audience, David? Yep, what's your own view?
I think the language we've heard here tonight is highly emotive, highly charged language. It sees all women as victims. Yeah. Whereas we have heard from Niki and from Annette and others that some women actually make the choice to go into prostitution. So therefore, it's not the black and white division that the Turn Off the Red Light seeks to make it into. The Swedish model, the intent of the Swedish model is to make men solely responsible for prostitution and to make all women look like victims. And this is a very black and white division, which is not borne out in reality. The world is much more complex than that. And the intent of the Swedish model, if it was to be put into practice here, it would be to demonise men.
Yes, that's right.
Have that effect.
OK, Sarah, on that, the notion that it is much more complex, maybe, than the campaign that you have going at the moment. That is a very complex issue.
I think the fact is that what we are recognising is that in relation to particularly tackling the issue of vulnerability, exploitation, child trafficking, child prostitution, the fundamental harm and danger of prostitution, we absolutely recognise that it is very complex. Women's individual stories are very different, and yet there is a constant thread of control, organised crime and risk and harm. A very pragmatic response is to try and minimise the size of the sex trade by hitting demand and at the same time making sure that those women in prostitution, irrespective of what brought them in there, are not criminalised.
But Sarah,
that's
look,
a
we
critical
heard from
element.
Lynette there tonight. She doesn't look like a victim.
What I would say is we work with women, a lot of the women we work with are still actively involved in the sex trade. The majority are attached to some form of third-party control.
There are exceptions.
What I would say, though, is you don't legislate for the minority, and I would strongly contend that those women who are without any connection are what would be called independent are the minority. And at the same time, those women are reporting to us that they are being intimidated, threatened, robbed by those who are organising the sex trade.
Okay,
Yeah, but Teresa, before I go.
Okay, can I just have the floor for 2 minutes, right?
1 minute.
Number one, okay, 1 minute. The Anti-Human Trafficking Unit released a report just a couple of weeks ago. So there are only 19 cases in 2012, of whom there was just 1 conviction. So there aren't thousands.
Or else the legislation is not fit for purpose.
Okay, one
and that's
conviction.
what's happening.
And the 1 conviction was of a woman who had trafficked another woman into Ireland.
Niki, you want to come back?
The situation in Sweden is where, to the extent that they've said that the sex trade has been reduced, I mean, I speak to women, sex workers in Sweden a lot, and the first grievance that they have is that they were never consulted and never involved in this law, but also that the women, it's not that there's been less prostitution, but women have been displaced. They've been moved to border towns and underground and in a less visible way. And I think that if you're describing harm through prostitution like rape and assault and abuse, why are those offences not being dealt with as the existing criminal offences that
demand creates supply. Demand creates supply. That supply is being exploited. It is raising 250 million approximately for organised crime. We can stop it. We can change it. The committee, the Oireachtas committee, spent nearly a year deliberating. They recommended unanimously that we take an approach that protects women, that tackles demands and says that Ireland does not think it's okay to buy women.
You know, domestic violence is a very serious problem. 2 women a week are killed in domestic violence, and nobody is proposing that you abolish marriage.
Niki, I just want to read a few comments at the end. Dahi O'Leary says control and safety are important. Stopping sexual exploitation, trafficking will not occur. It won't be 100% right, but have a go. People are naive. They think you can eliminate prostitution. It will always exist. And finally, Brendan Roach goes, legalise it, enforce strict laws and regulate the industry. Give the workers rights and safety. Stop criminals from running it. There's obviously a very interesting argument on both sides. I really appreciate you all coming. Thank you very much. Thanks to the audience. Claire.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, the government has announced its decision to reopen the Vatican Embassy.